Good morning. I'm Jo Davidson. I'm Director of Policy at the Edinburgh Chamber of Commerce, and it's my very, very great pleasure to welcome you all to this morning's keynote session, which is part of our week-long programme of events as hosts of Edinburgh's first business festival. I'm especially delighted to welcome this morning's keynote speaker, Katie Mulligan, who is Managing Director of Customer, Commercial and Propositions at Openreach. Openreach, as you know, I'm sure, essentially run the UK's digital network, connecting homes, schools, hospitals, businesses to the rest of the world. And as I'm sure we'll all agree, in the absence of most physical connectivity over the course of the past year, the need for high quality and accessible digital connectivity has never been greater. That criticality of connectivity is now an ever sharper focus. Research done last year by the Centre for Economics and Business Research shows that the clear economic benefits connecting everyone in Scotland to full fibre would create a £4.5 billion economic boost for the country and help 37,000 more people to access employment, reduce pressure on housing, support remote working, and various other benefits which will be much needed, as I'm sure you'll agree, as we emerge and recover from the current situation. And we in Edinburgh are very fortunate to be one of the first areas in the UK to be able to benefit from Openreach's full fibre programme, which I know Katie will talk about in a bit more detail today. Katie has an incredibly impressive CV. She joined BT in 2004 after graduating from the business school at the University of Strathclyde. She's responsible for Openreach's entire £5 billion product portfolio, defining and delivering new products. And she plays a key role in managing relationships with Openreach's over 650 communication provider customers. She is accountable for the creation of a number of significant business cases which underpin Openreach's strategic network investments into rolling out full fibre, not just in Edinburgh, obviously, and in Scotland, but across the whole of the UK. And even more impressively, Katie will become the chair of Openreach Scotland, of the Openreach Scotland Board in April of 2021. So many congratulations on that excellent new appointment, Katie, and hopefully we can chat a little bit more about that this morning in our session. Before I hand over to Katie, can I just remind all delegates that you can ask your questions throughout the session this morning. There's a Q&A function at the bottom of your screen, which is open. And you can put your questions in there as we go, and we'll pick those up when we get to the Q&A session after Katie's remarks this morning. But again, welcome, Katie. Thank you for joining us today, and over to you.
Thank you very much, Jo, and thank you for such a stunning introduction. I'm blushing already, and thank you for having me to the event. I just wanted to say congratulations on it, and I think it's such an important event given where we are as an industry and actually as a country in terms of what will be the new era. First of all, I want to say thank you to folks for joining. I hope you're managing to keep safe and sane, as I know a number of us will have very many different challenges as we go through what has been lockdown with schooling and other challenges. And actually, it's quite an interesting time for me to give this presentation, because had I given this presentation probably about a year ago, it might not have meant as much around the infrastructure that this country has so much relied on through this pandemic. And it really feels that the absolute joy and passion that I have for connectivity, it now becomes tangible and it becomes real. So after the last 10 years, finally, I think my family now understand what I do. Maybe not fully, but they understand how important it is to invest in infrastructure to ensure that people can continue to stay connected. So what I'm going to do in the presentation today is really just tell you a bit more about Openreach, who we are, what we do, and really to spend the time focusing, as Joanne has said, we are showcasing our big fibre build in Edinburgh. It's one of the key cities. Of course, Glasgow's there as well. I can't lie, you can tell from my accent, I'm a West Coaster. So I'm equally as passionate around connecting both cities and indeed the whole of Scotland. So I'll tell you a bit about that. And it's really so important to understand, because it's one thing building the infrastructure, but the reality is if you don't connect to it and you're not thinking ahead of time, particularly around, for example, the Edinburgh City Plan, the Economic Recovery Plan, if we don't connect the dots together, we actually miss a lot of the benefits that we could reap as a collective. So if I go on to the slide deck, I think someone's going to help me share it because I'm having some device issues. If we go on to the next slide, just a bit about who Openreach are and what we do. And as Jo has said, I've got this very complicated job title. I'm the Managing Director of Customer, Commercials and Propositions. We always like to give ourselves these difficult titles. What it means is my job is anything customer and commercial. Our products, our portfolio, the pricing, our customer relationships. And if I think about the main antithesis of my job, one, to make sure that we have connectivity in the right places, either through the right business cases or products, and two, to make sure that customers actually take it up. As I go through the presentation, one of the things that's always so, I get so stressed about it actually, is we spend all this time putting out this infrastructure and people don't know it's there. And not only do they not know that it's there, they could upgrade for much cheaper than they're paying today. So from a consumer protection point of view, there's lots of benefits. But who are Openreach? I bet you after this presentation, you will now cannot help yourself from seeing Openreach vans. So I now, probably on average, every day on my daily walk, I see about 3. Not so great for me when I don't want to be spotted out and about. But I bet you'll now see us. We're like that silent brand to a certain extent, where we are accountable for keeping the country connected. We are over 34,000 people. We are an independent part of the BT Group. And we are literally in every single community in the country. That includes all of the Highlands, that includes the islands. And it's so important because we are making sure that we are the nationwide provider of connectivity. And it's not only that we are operating in all of the local communities, we've got over 3,000 people in Scotland. And some of the things that I'm hugely proud about from a Scottish perspective is we have long-term employment within the communities of Scotland. It's very important that we have that. And we are continuing to recruit in Scotland. I think at this point in time when we'll be going into economic recovery. And not only that, we're creating traineeships. I'm really proud of the future skills that we can provide to Scotland, in addition to obviously the infrastructure investment. And you may not think about it, but we actually have services into 32 million premises in the UK, either broadband services into homes or into businesses. We provide the connectivity. And whenever you think of Openreach, you might have traditionally thought of BT, but I can tell you on a weekly basis, I sell as much broadband to BT as I do to Sky. And then you add in TalkTalk, Vodafone, 600 CPs. So actually, we in essence are a completely open platform that provides choice. And that is quite important when it comes to providing the infrastructure, because you're making sure that end customers have choice. And that is so important from a pricing perspective, so customers can get the best deal, but also a network that works. And Openreach is at a very important point in its history. We are making sure that we are at the fore of the next telecoms network. If you think about the history of telecoms, we had the good old copper network. I mean, I think that's been over 100 years old. It was run by the post office, the GPO for anyone that can remember that, the switching in wartime. That network still exists today, a bit more automated, but it still exists. And it's delivering great services to homes and businesses. About 10 years ago, we invested in fibre to the cabinet. And at the time, I remember, because this is when I was just starting out, people were like, we don't need even more broadband. Who needs more broadband? And even till up about 3 years ago, we still had really low numbers of customers on super fast broadband. If you think about now, Scotland, I think, has super fast to over 92% of prems. Just think where we would have been in lockdown. if we had not had that network. And what we're doing now is we are at the next stage. So we built super fast. That means it's speeds of up to about 80 meg. You can do most things that you want to do. But the new world for the next 40 years plus will be about full fibre technology. That is up to gigabit services. I don't know what we'll use it for, but I assure you, under the laws of physics, once you give it to people, they'll find a way of using it. And lots of HDs, you name it. By the time we have kids, I tell you, they'll be using a gig. And that's our job now, because that network can take 10 to 15 years to build. And what we're doing now is building it ahead of time. And as Jo has said, I'm really proud that the key cities in Scotland and in the rurals are at the forefront of getting that investment before anyone else. So really, this presentation is just about highlighting and sharing some of that stuff with you. So as I said, I wanted to just share what it means for Edinburgh. So we built around 100,000 premises with our new full fibre technology. And if we just go on to the next slide, we've got a bit of a video to bring it to life in terms of what it means for Edinburgh. You might notice some sites here if we can play the video.
Edinburgh is a unique city because it manages to be a small city that punches above its weight. It aspires to be a world city. And the citizens of Edinburgh want us to be more connected to the rest of the UK, the rest of Europe, the rest of the world. And this will help us accelerate that process.
Shawfair is the southeast of Scotland's largest urban expansion. Openreach have been in the great position to be able to get the infrastructure designed and installed to be able to cater for any future requirements. That's been absolutely essential to us and is something now that the house building community, the business users and the public use are demanding.
Being an Edinburgh boy, it's great to be able to help the community, and I think bringing fibre to them and linking everybody together is a great thing, yeah. I think fibre's a completely different ballgame from working with the old network, with copper network. I think it's because that's still on the ground, it brings its own problems. Congested, older style ducts in Edinburgh in particular make that difficult, but it's basically just huge experience of guys, huge experience of the workforce getting us through.
The fact that Openreach are investing in fibre broadband in this city allows us to take the next step forward, allows our businesses to be connected, our communities to be connected. What we're looking for now is a future that is connected to the rest of the world, and fibre broadband allows us to do that.
Fantastic. Ooh. It was so good, we were getting it again. Now you can have it offline if you'd like it again, but we have these for a number of the cities, and I think whenever you see it coming to life, you can see really what it does. But to bring it into perspective, as I've said, Edinburgh is one of the first cities to benefit from the full fibre investment. So to date, we have built around 100,000 premises in Edinburgh. That is across the city centre and further out. And that delivers up to gigabit broadband. If you think about what you've got in your house today, I mean, the possibilities for what that can do to your home and for businesses is fundamentally life-changing. And I know whenever I say this, I remember up until a year ago, people would be like, it's just broadband. It's like, I tell you, if you didn't have it, then you would know. It's one of these things, we think of ourselves as like the fourth utility. This is really how we want to consider ourselves. You would always think about connecting your home and business to gas, water, electricity, but you now need to think about doing the same as broadband, and that's how we need to think about actually enabling that. And we'll continue to build gigabit fibre right throughout the next 10 years plus. We did it with super fast. We will continue to do it with ultra fast. We're at the moment building in about 90 cities and towns and villages. And what you'll see is we will continue to announce. We announce every couple of months a new tranche. And you should look out for that because it will be a whole bunch. There's quite a lot coming actually in Scotland in the next wave. It's nothing to do with me, of course, but I'm advocating as much as possible. And it's not just about city build. And I think that's the really important piece for Openreach, which is the cities are the best places to go to. You normally get high dense areas and probably lower cost to build. But what we're doing within Openreach is we do believe that we have a societal obligation to make sure that we don't leave people behind and we connect communities. So what we're aiming for is what we call a balanced build. When we build full fibre, not only are we building to the key cities, we're building to different developments, we're building to things like new sites to make sure we don't leave those behind. They're not digitally stranded. And also in what we call area 3, areas that are not commercially viable normally to go to. We're innovating and finding ways to get fibre to those areas that wouldn't actually get it. So for example, Peebles, Ardrossan is in here. I have to declare Ardrossan is my hometown. And it honestly cracks me up that I have had to move from Ardrossan, I'll be honest, down to London in order for work, but yet my mother has better broadband than me. Mind you, it's transformed her life for a 71-year-old, and thank goodness during lockdown, but it just shows the typical places in the past that would have had, that would have been part of the social divide and would have had the brain drain and migration. We're now able to put in fibre in order to put back into that community. And the reason why we want full fibre technology is fundamentally, one, it's faster. It provides the ability to get more packets down. Think about a motorway. We're just adding in more lanes so that we can get more traffic going down that connection. That's so important because we're trying to do more stuff even in homes. We're trying to make sure that we can do schooling, working, TV, video calls. I think post-lockdown, life has changed. And it's really accelerated for us the need for the digital connectivity. And the length that we can, the reason why we want glass versus copper is the distances that we can put fibre in and you don't get any degradation. It means we can have much longer fibre runs. That's very important for rural Scotland. It means where we could not get previous technologies, we can run huge fibre spines right through the length and breadth of Scotland to provide that connectivity. But the one thing I'll probably challenge is, it was interesting when I looked at the stats, I was so disappointed last night when I looked at the take up in Edinburgh, 9%. So if you think how important broadband is, Edinburgh is under indexed versus some of the English cities. And I see that as a challenge to all of us to make sure that we can get people onto the best broadband possible. And I'll come on to some of the reasons why that's important if we go on to the next slide. Oh, I'll cover that, sorry, one more on business first. And the piece for us is whenever we talk about full fibre, one of the things people always think about is just your home broadband and whether or not you can get broadband to your local community. One of the things that's also unique about Openreach is, unlike any other company, we provide connectivity, the length and breadth, as I've said, of the country. And that means that we will provide connectivity to businesses also. They have very different requirements than the average consumer. And we have a range of products and services that we deliver anywhere between 10 megs to 10 gigs. I mean, just think of what you can do for that. And then right up to 100 gigabits. And to put it into perspective, what that means is we're able to connect up the high street banks, the takeaway companies that now need Deliveroo because their model has changed. Not only around business connectivity, so point to point, to make sure that we can share data between, say, branch offices and other parts of the UK and beyond. The thing that's actually going to be really important to Scotland now is around that connectivity beyond Scotland into Europe and things like data centres, new areas of industrial investment. And it is the infrastructure backbone that enables that. One of the things you forget about is we don't only just deliver these over land, we have to do deep sea cables as well. So when you see things in the news around deep sea cables going out, we literally bury internet cables at the bottom of the seabed to make sure we can connect Scotland. And we will continue to do that, because in the new world, Scotland needs to ensure that it is on par with everyone else around the level of investment and data centres and everything else that needs to be invested in to make sure the country is prosperous. And one of the things that I would challenge for people listening to this today, as I'm stepping into the role of the Openreach chair, one of the things that has really brought to life to me is around connecting the dots. So, for example, I read the economic recovery plan, the city plan, and I was trying to count how many times we talk about infrastructure and broadband and connectivity. We make our plans and we sometimes forget. And actually, if one of the things that I'll be trying to do is to make sure that where we've got business leaders, we can think about interweaving programmes that will be for the good of Scotland, and how together we can collaborate to make sure that actually, if we're putting in infrastructure the length and breadth of Scotland, we do it for multiple reasons: to connect up charging points for new homes, for new businesses, for new industrial parks. If we're extending a motorway, an internet cable goes alongside it. It's how do we think about a connected nation and what that means. And if we go on to the next slide, it's not just around, is it good to be connected? Don't just believe us, we fundamentally can see the benefits. So what we did was we conducted some independent research to really help understand some of the benefits. And Joe, you touched on it in your introduction, which is we do see, and others can see, being smart and being digitally connected has fundamental benefits for the country, for the nation, and for individuals. So it is not without doubt that there is a reason why broadband and connectivity is fundamental to any of the governments of the devolved nations. That is because it will add money back in to the communities and the productivity levels. So what we see is if we're able to full fibre the whole of the country, that will deliver 4.5 billion of benefits of productivity. Now, this isn't just about Openreach, to be really clear. There are others who will help deliver this. There are other infrastructure providers, and it is a joint game. Openreach will deliver the majority of it, but it won't just be Openreach, so we're all adding into this. And it's not just at a nation level. If you equate that back to individuals, that's just under £2,000 per person. For anyone who runs numbers out there, what level of return do you get per person for that sort of investment? Not much. And I think the important thing for me is around also the societal benefits. So we've obviously got the economic plan, and that drives right into the Edinburgh recovery plan. You can see the parallels. But what it does do is it's the societal benefits that I get very passionate about, particularly around Scotland. I can see the benefits that it brings to reduce the societal gap and the digital exclusion, to connect peoples that wouldn't necessarily have opportunities in their local area. We'll be able to enable people working from home. That seems more of a reality now. Some of the numbers here is around, can we populate again some of the rural areas that have had migration? So we believe through some of this investment, just under 300,000 people could move back to the rural areas. And more importantly, and this is when people ask around, why do I get so passionate about this job personally for me, is I firmly believe that by enabling infrastructure, not only can we enable people to go back to rural areas, we can allow people to stay in the areas that they grew up with their family. So for example, I mentioned that I lived down in London. When I was growing up, I was instantly told, I came from a small town in Ardrossan. For anyone who knows it, it's the town that leads to Arran. But it went through social deprivation. We had shipbuilding there, and whenever that moved out, it really, really is socially deprived. And what happened for me was there was never any question as I was growing up that I would have to move. And it wasn't even that I was moving to Glasgow or to Edinburgh. I was brought up knowing I would have to move to London. And it really racked me because I never felt at home and I always knew I was leaving. And the piece for me now is around making sure that if I can work with Openreach to deliver connectivity that doesn't mean that, it gives the ability for new industries to open up, people to work from home that are not having to move away. And for me, when I look at my nieces and nephews, I want them to know that there's opportunity in Scotland, that they've got fibre. And I look at Ardrossan getting a better connectivity that I've got, that my nephews could maybe find the ability to stay at home with my sister. I'm sure she's very happy. But it's that stuff that really does bring it to life for me around why it can fundamentally change the country and obviously the prosperity of the nation. So that is really what I wanted to share today. Hopefully it gives you a bit of a flavour around who Openreach are, what we do, and why we believe that actually it's not just about another broadband company talking about this. There's real societal and economic benefits to those who come along with the journey. But please do not forget that it's not like Kevin Costner in Field of Dreams, build it and they will come. You have to help educate people on what digital switchover means and making sure they connect to it to get the benefits. And that's the piece that I'll be asking everyone to help with as we share this journey. So that concludes the presentation, Jo, and I think if we're going to perhaps open up for some questions.
Yeah, Katie, thank you so much for that. That was a great overview, lots of ground covered, and I think your passion for the subject matter was very evident and rightly placed. You know, we would share your views certainly in terms of the criticality, as I mentioned earlier, of connectivity. We've seen that through the pandemic. We were seeing it beforehand anyway, but it's obviously what's happened over the course of the past year has really accelerated the pace of it. And you know, we take the challenge, I guess.
Fantastic.
In terms of your final call there, as you closed your remarks. We are going to open up the session to questions now. We've had a few coming through on the chat, which is great. So please keep those coming. If we can kick off then, Katie, a question I have, but it's also aligned to a question that Sean Bruce has put into the Q&A. Obviously, working through the pandemic will have been a challenge, I'm sure, for you and for your teams. But what you do is so critical that obviously it was very important that work had to continue. Can you maybe tell us a little bit about some of the challenges that you face very broadly, how Openreach have adapted some of your working practices to reflect some of the restrictions that have been placed upon you? How have you managed the risk of that, I guess, because that's I'm sure been a huge issue for you, and also to Sean's question about bringing in people and training new trainee engineers that you've had to hire, and how has that process changed for you pre-pandemic? So sorry, quite a few things in there, but,
no worries.
I think quite broad.
You might have to remind me if I forget some of them, and thanks for the question, Sean. So throughout the pandemic, I've had another role, which is to be involved in the Gold Command, which is in essence our very highest command control. It sounds very army, but you know what I mean in terms of how we had to operate. And I think, to be very honest, it was the world just turned upside down for us. I've never been in a situation where we would literally come off, like everyone else, we would get very little notice from number 10 around any changes that were being made. And literally the key executives would be on calls till 3-4 in the morning, hand briefing comms to the whole of the workforce. But I think the first thing is, one learning point, all hands on deck, but doing it in a very structured way. It's interesting for us. So Openreach is obviously, it deals in risk, as you can imagine, because of health and safety, people, regulatory. So we were lucky that we have a very clear structure around how we deal with incident management. So we were set up in terms of our gold, silver command. We basically formed into it. I think the first important thing for us around operating was we, in essence, had to remove the democracy. We instantly had to just assign owners, even if they weren't subject matter experts, assign owners and go in line. And I think that was very important around, you're in a world where everyone's got an opinion. You have to support who's in the line and get fully behind them, no questions. So I think that was really important. We went into position really quickly. The other piece for us was around accepting that we weren't going to be at 100%. It was a mindset shift and really understanding early on that our job was twofold. Number one, without fail, keep the country connected, do whatever it needs to do to help fight this pandemic. But above all else, we have a duty to keep our people safe. And we weren't going to compromise that. So those were the two things driving us. The financials, it was a bizarre place, went out the window. It was just keep the country going, do it safely. So we've been through various runs of this. And I think the key piece for us was obviously continuity. Like everyone else, getting people into homes, getting them set up. But I think the biggest thing for us was around, and it was the most difficult decision, which is we were getting really conflicting or lack of advice, I'll be honest, from the government around the status of our employees, whether or not they were key workers, etc. And we had to come up with our own rule sets that we felt were safe and proper for our engineers. I won't go through all of the planning, but I think some of the things that we had to do was remember that we're dealing with people. For all, we're an infrastructure company, we're a service company at the end, and without your frontline people, you do not have the support. We had to take difficult decisions around pulling them out of homes, changing all of our processes. We tried to connect customers outside of the house. We didn't want certain engineers going in. And I'll be honest, it was very difficult for us when we decided to limit the time in homes for our engineers, but other competitors went in. We lost a lot of business, but at the time it was the right thing to do. So, and we're still in measures where we've limited engineers going back in. But I think the key thing for us is we've had to learn to adapt, that we're going to have to make decisions in the absence of clarity. I think that's the biggest thing for us, documenting it and being really clear and getting behind it. Second of all, always making sure health and safety is above all else and making sure that's right. Thirdly, and this is the most important thing for me as the leader that I am, we remembered people's feelings. And I think bringing that to the decision-making table, and we did delay some comms, we made sure that we got them right, and we phoned people and asked their opinion before we just threw out management comms. I think that was slightly a different approach. And I think the actual biggest challenges are yet to come. I think we've operated for a year now in different measures. I think the problem is now we have real fear. I've got that in the management desk community where people don't want to go back into the offices, even though we've made safety changes, etc. And I have in the field where they don't want to go back into premises. So that is the pieces that we'll be working with now. Obviously, we are so tied in terms of vaccinations, testing, etc. But that's the challenge we're all going to have to cope with. I don't know if that covers all the questions, Joe, that Sean had.
No, that's great. And I think the fear issue is one that a lot of our members and businesses across the city would recognise. But Sean's point was around the how you brought on your new people, how you trained your new engineers.
So what happened at first we stopped. And then we realised that actually we needed, that wasn't a reasonable situation because our volumes actually went up as a result of people putting in more repair. We had more snow, as you know, you've had a torrid time in terms of the weather. So what we actually did, we found new ways. We actually were more innovative. Heaven forbid we used the internet to train rather than just physical training skills. We changed all of our training plans. We looked at how much that we could do digitally, how much we could do remotely through visual learning, through Teams. And then we really limited the practical learning to as limited as possible. We then also changed all of our training schools. We got some in Scotland, opened one in Livingston, and we literally had to limit the number of people so that we could be socially distanced. And we found alternative areas where we could open up training schools that weren't there before because we could only have a handful of people. But one of the things we were really clear about is the world had to continue for us. And as long as we could continue to be safe and at a distance, we put the training in as quickly as possible. But I think the one thing that it has done for us is we've become so acutely aware of the time to competency and really only training the physical staff needed and actually taking some of it out into the field where it was safer. You're not in an enclosed environment. But I'll be honest, there are challenges. We can't have 2 people per van for buddying. We've had to just change some of the processes around with additional vehicles, but we have continued to train, albeit not at the throughput, as you can imagine.
Sure. And I guess, as you're saying, as we reopen, that's going to be a challenge that many of our businesses will face. I'll slightly align to that, but on a slightly different tangent. Michael Bissett has asked the question in the Q&A around the issue of skills and talent. Is there deemed to be a future lack of talent in the area that Openreach works in, and what more needs to be done to help this to be seen as a career option for young people, and in turn also looking at reskilling as an option for those who may have to change career on the back of the pandemic or have been displaced in terms of employment?
Yeah, it's a really interesting topic. So there's different levels of types of work for Openreach. There is very heavy physical work. And actually there is an issue because of Brexit, I'll be honest, with the availability of folks for that. So we are trying to find different areas of bringing people in. I think the most interesting diversification for us in terms of skills is, to that very point, retraining people and getting them to think about engineering differently. It's always been deemed as dirty male work. But actually, if I look at the recruitment that we're finding, we're actually taking a lot of people now from the hospitality industry, from the retail industry, baristas from coffee shops. And actually, do you know what? Thank goodness we've opened up our eyes to the skills that are there. Because if you think about it, we think about engineering, but we forget we are in customers' homes. And actually, they're more than capable of doing the engineering just as much as everyone else, but we now get this added benefit of the customer service that we didn't have. The other piece that we've been also looking at is, as we've had to diversify some of our skills, we're trying to work at actually some of the things that we can remove that make it more open to people. One, that's practical, but it's also in terms of how we talk about the jobs. So 2 examples around inclusion. For some reason, our typical test to enter into Openreach, I didn't have to do it, is a plug test. Can you rewire a plug? And what we found, and we can't find out the reason, well, we found out that actually a number of people from the BAME community, we were trying to include to get more diversity, were failing the plug test. We didn't actually need the plug test to prove that they could do the job. So that was, we took that out, and there we got better inclusion. And second of all, the other area that's really important to us is we've realised that the way we talk about Openreach has a bearing on the people that apply and the types of skills we get. So we've worked out that we want more technical skills, digital skills. If we talk about engineering, we don't get it. So we've changed the way in which we talk about it, and also the way in which we're trying to attract skills through different apprenticeships, through schools, through STEM, but just trying to look at all of the areas where we get different skill sets. I mean, currently, we're not seeing that there's a drop in skills because we think they can be learned. I think the main issue will be is everyone's building at the same time, whether or not it is railways, motorways, data centres, infrastructure. That's my worry, that everyone's going after the same physical civils engineering resource, and as an industry, we don't tie it together. I think that's where I'm more worried about.
Yeah. And I think that aspect that you touch upon in terms of employers looking at things very differently now, and perhaps thinking a little bit out of the box about how they try to attract that talent. Absolutely. And retain it as well, I guess, is another issue, and particularly
absolutely, that's just as important.
Yeah. So that's clearly going to be a big thing in terms of the amount you must be investing, I'm sure, and the people that you bring along, and the skills that they acquire over a long period of time. You talked a bit about in your remarks about joining the dots, and I think that's a really, really important thing. As you say, that's something obviously as the Chamber of Commerce we try to do. We exist in large part to try to help to join the dots. How do you see that happening? How are Openreach engaging in that join the dots conversation, and how are you trying to kind of make sure that there is more of a joined up approach, I guess, in a lot of these initiatives that you've touched upon, where the connectivity piece really underpins everything.
Yeah, so from an Openreach perspective, we're trying to get a voice and involved as many things as possible, be it with Scottish Government, be it with enterprise bodies, through chambers, through different papers, and trying to bring to the fore around what infrastructure actually means. And we are forever trying to speak to different bodies to try and help connect them to each other. And this is where you will be really helpful in this, because we don't know everything that's happening, and we are always in listening mode to try and work out what projects people are working on. So for example, in the last couple of weeks, we've been speaking to Highlands and Islands enterprises, south of Scotland, and actually there are similarities. Then you might look at the digital infrastructure paper from ScotGov, lots of things, and actually trying to look at your own papers in Edinburgh around your economic recovery and also the city plan. We are forever trying to get a hold of people's policies and documents and just trying to speak to more people. And what we're also trying to do within Openreach is to make sure that we are more externally focused and there are more people out there to have conversation with. And that's part of the reason as well we have a Scotland Board, to make sure that actually, because Scotland is in a different point of its expansion, that actually we have a board ready to work with Scottish enterprises. So we are literally, Joe, trying to speak to as many people as possible. So part of doing things like this is people now have a name and they can contact me with anything, and I can put it in the right direction in the country and in the company.
Brilliant, that's great. Well, for our part, we're totally happy to support that activity, and I'm sure our guests today will no doubt take you up on that offer now that they know who you are and how to reach you. And I guess slightly following on from that, one of the questions in the chat from one of our attendees is, you mentioned in your remarks about uptake in Edinburgh being only 9%. I was personally pretty shocked about that. I got to be honest.
Yep.
I would have thought it would have been higher. But how do you feel we should collectively work together to help to move the city forward in terms of that number, and how do we achieve that increase in uptake that you mentioned?
Yeah, so that's been the part of my job that I'm focused on most, actually, outside of the Scotland piece. And it is multiple levels. One, it's about education. It's around trying to help people understand actually the world is going to move digital. And that is for trade bodies, that is for the government. We'll be looking at local authority level, because we need to help educate business owners and customers and residents around what it means. Because just on a practical level, if you think about it, we are digitally plumbing people's homes. Whenever we talk about pushing in full fibre, it's not that we're going to send a new broadband router out in the post and someone will be in fiddling at the cabinet down the street. We literally will be plumbing glass fibre broadband into your house. It's like getting a new gas pipe, albeit not as messy. But when you tell people you're fundamentally switching over their technology for the next 50, 100 years, it's a very, very different concept. So there is a big education piece. There's also a piece around the people that sell the broadband, so the internet service providers and the communication providers. And I know that Ofcom, who are the regulatory body, and the consumer protection groups like Which and others, are really focused on making sure customers understand choice. And I think it's making sure they understand, actually, did you know that you could have X, Y, and Z type broadband? And did you know this is the price? I think there's a lot of inertia with people switching broadband because they're worried that they're going to lose it. So it's trying to help educate people. One, it is available to your prem. Second of all, it's probably cheaper than what you pay for today. And thirdly, this is the benefits that it can create. And then I think there is another piece that we want to work with key folks such as employers and also folks like councils. One of the things that we really want to ensure is that there is social inclusion. So if you think about trying to encourage councils to get customers to act online, maybe council tax, etc., so that there is a bit of a pull in really getting customers knowing that they need slightly better broadband to facilitate their lives. But to a certain extent, Joe, the lockdown has actually accelerated some of this, and we could see customers more demanding. But But it's also got its inverse effect, which is those people who don't have great broadband, and 8% of the UK don't, and we're working to close that. That is where they feel more excluded. So there's making sure people who have great broadband can get even better, but we don't leave people behind. They just don't have the right solution. So we look at it from numbers of angles.
And you touched again on it in your remarks, and you've kind of touched on it there again, Katie, around the societal benefits and the whole, issue of digital exclusion and that kind of thing. Now, I know obviously that's not really I know it's not directly your area, and it's more your customers, but what are your views on because again that's come into sharper focus, I think, over the course of the last year or so, and I would be just interested to know your views on that, the whole digital exclusion.
I mean, you're right, it is more our communication providers, our ISPs, but we're right in the heart of the discussion with government also. I think there's a couple of places to it. One, which is, why don't people take broadband today? Whether or not, and it's unpacking it, because the study which was undertaken by the government was around people are worried that A, they don't have it, and B, it's too expensive. But actually, when you unpack it, there are lots of social tariffs out there from a number of communication providers, be it Vodafone, be it BT. You have cheap price plans. So actually, people can get fixed broadband cheaper than mobile. So on the one angle, it's about, can we as an industry help increase education around the types of packages that are available for certain groups, be it whether or not it's child benefit, etc. Then there is a piece around whether or not it's digital inclusion. Do people have the devices that would allow them to get on? And that is where I know that our parent company, BT, are working with schools and other charities to make sure there is, one, tech skills, to make sure that people understand what it means to be online, and two, getting access to refurbished devices, etc. And then there is a whole piece around, not just around the fact that around social economic demographic, we have to think about the older community as well. One of the things that I'm working on is, by 2025, we will have taken out the legacy voice platform. So that may mean that customers who don't have broadband today and rely on their copper lifeline service, particularly for things like healthcare alarms, those services have to be replaced. And we have to think about, and this is where we're working with healthcare bodies, consumer protection groups, CPE vendors, etc. How do we get people to understand actually the world is changing for them? And not only do we upgrade their technology into their home, but we try and get them on to connectivity at the same point to make sure that there are skills. So it's a long-winded answer, Joe, but there are so many bits we're trying to unpack, and we're trying to understand within Openreach is, do we do something different commercially to try and get more access? But I think I get more worried about the fact that there's so many options out there, but they're just not being taken up. Mm-hmm. They're not, yeah. and you can see each of our ISP offering these plans, and it's really only now, because they've been specifically talked about throughout COVID, that we're starting to see a bit more of a pull.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's obviously a hugely complex area, and the reasons behind exclusion are varied, and so it's but it's good to hear that work is being done on it, and
absolutely.
That it's definitely a focus for the industry, which is great. A slightly more personal question now, I guess, and it's come through on the chat as well, but something I was particularly interested in is, obviously we're coming up to International Women's Day on Monday, and you are a young female in what is perceived to be a very male-dominated industry. What can you talk a little bit about your journey in that, really, and also how you feel we can encourage more women into tech or engineering type roles?
Yeah, so my own journey. So I joined the BT graduate scheme straight after university, and I think first of all, it's really interesting for me. I had a bit of an interesting upbringing, but the one thing I do thank my parents for is that they never associated anything gender-wise for me. So there is no discussion whatsoever that I can or can't do anything, or society says. They just didn't give me any teaching at all. But what that did is it automatically had in my mind that I wasn't in a man's world, that anything was possible. And I think that has been so important for me, coming from a Drossen, really from a small town. I genuinely never believed that there was any bars on me around whether or not I could go into any industry. I just didn't hear it. I didn't see it. I closed my eyes to it. And if I look at my own career journey, I think that if anything, I don't think it's my gender. I think it's my age that has always stood against me. And I remember joining it. It's like, well, she can't get paid the same, because even though she does the same, she's young. She's not got 50 years of experience. And honestly, I really don't ever see my gender as an issue. But I know that people always look at me thinking, your age. Then gender comes next. But anyway, so I don't see it as an issue for me personally. However, I do see it very much in our engineering communities. And I mentor an awful lot of female and male engineers around why is this? One, I think it's the language. And we want to try and make sure that we're always thinking that these are tough jobs and these are manual jobs. A lot of them are not. And we shroud ourselves in this to try and make it feel like we've done a really difficult physical day's work. And it's trying to break down some of that language. The other thing for me is around trying to make sure that, one, there is a numbers game, trying to get more and more of a representative mix through the workplace. Doesn't, not just females, but one, to make sure that there's more faces around the table, more faces, that it becomes more natural. Our communities are split 50-50. Why the hell shouldn't our workplaces be? But I think the key thing for me is around, it cannot just be about numbers. Once you start to unpack the microaggressions, the language, the way in which we talk or we communicate, it all reinforces the fact that it's very dominant, etc. So we're trying to do a lot of unpacking. But for me, it's not been an issue. I must admit, the only thing for me is, and this is probably more a kind of management leadership, and I'm very vocal about this, is it's not so fact that it's engineering and it's male, it's behavioural in the way in which people speak to each other that can be off-putting, and trying to unpack and educate people, male and female, that the way in which we communicate is just as bad as being using certain language, etc. The tone, the pace, what time we set meetings, lots of many things that just make it slightly more balanced and allowing people a voice. So I think I've been lucky. I hear some terrible stories, and it is my quest to, particularly in Openreach, is a very male dominated, to basically prove you can be yourself, you can be regional, you can be young, you can be female, you can be normal, whatever normal is, and not be ego driven and still succeed.
Yeah, well, that's a great message. And with you taking on your new role as chair, that I think when people see that being modelled at that level, that's, I'm sure, as well, one of the big things. And it's great that you'll be taking on that role and be able to sort of model that culture and change, I guess. Brilliant, great. We've had a last minute question, just time for one more, and then we probably need to start wrapping up, or a couple more maybe. But from Paul Skratic in the chat, and apologies, Paul, I probably completely butchered your last name there, so I apologise. But Paul's asking about fibring the new town in Edinburgh, where there are cobbles and access issues, and how are you planning to do that there? Because I imagine that's a difficult challenge.
It is hugely difficult, and it's actually on paper one of the reasons why Scotland would be under-indexed on fibre coverage than any other city. Right. It's a couple of reasons. It's not just the cobbles, but it's the fact that the Scottish cities have a higher predominance of multi-dwelling units, so tenements, etc., that require access. So part of this is it's multifaceted. One, we're trying innovative techniques to try and use underlying ducts and overhead as far as possible, so we avoid digging. Second of all, it's trying to make sure that we get rights of access with the local bodies and the councils, etc., to make sure that we are allowed to go and dig wherever else. But the reality for us is our mantra is we have to avoid digging wherever possible and working with what's there. And we literally pride ourselves on, we've got this expert chief engineer team, and they're like the ninjas who try and work out all these things to avoid disrupting things like cobbles, and that's so important. But what you'll see is, you'll notice as you go through, I think you'll see Storfen and Donaldson, little like bumblebee things on the sides of buildings. This is where we're literally trying to just fit our network terminations without trying to abuse the facade of the lovely sandstone buildings. It is a challenge, I'll be honest, and it's more challenging in Edinburgh, I'll be honest, than it is anywhere else. I'm not saying that Glasgow and other places aren't as pretty, but it is a bit of a challenge, and we continue to work through it every day.
Yeah, great, good stuff. And my last question, really, before we're wrapping up, just very briefly, is I guess one of about the future. You know, and what are Openreach's plans for the future? You know, what's next after the sort of full fibre revolution happens, we hope? What's next? What do you see coming down the line in terms of innovation and that sort of future of connectivity?
So, I mean, when we talk about this, I mean, this could be here for the next 40 years. I mean, it's really digital transformation for us. We talk about full fibre build, but in essence, we will be re-engineering our whole network architecture. So if you think about it, we are in thousands of exchanges today. These are buildings where we have the old telephony. When if I look out, our plan is A, build as much fibre as possible to friends and businesses, but B, switch over the network to digital. And that does mean re-architecting the network through different buildings and shutting down exchanges so that it is digitally switched. So it's a huge piece for us. And then you add on to that the piece around how do we make sure that whilst we do it, it is more inclusive, and the workforce is more inclusive. We get the right skilling for long-term employment. We make it simpler, and then we become greener. So the next thing for us is really around how do we become as green as possible. So we've not got those vans out in the road, and if they do, they're electric. Bit more of a challenge with the distances in Scotland, but that is a challenge that we want to overcome.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's certainly some big targets to reach there. So obviously
Absolutely.
we all have to play our part in that. Katie, thank you so much for your time this morning. It's been a great session. It's been hugely interesting and enjoyable. I could myself stay here all day and keep chatting with you about it. Thank you. It's been so good, and you know, we really appreciate you taking the time to come and speak with us today, and we take on the various challenges that you have.
I'll be coming back in 6 months to tell you the take-up figures. And just to say, Joe, I really appreciate the honour to be able to be involved today, and I wish you the best for the rest of the sessions.
Thank you so much. Can I also thank your team at Openreach for their support today and the logistics for today, and our team at the Chamber as well for doing that. And thank you all for your time, your attendance, your engagement. Thank you to Katie and the team, and we'll hopefully see you at another event sometime soon.